I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. The morning started like any other. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting patterns across the kitchen table, where I sat nursing a mug of black coffee. Emily sat across from me, dressed and ready, her face freshly made up, despite the early hour. I glanced at the clock. It was barely past 6:30. We'd been married 15 years, a span filled with laughter, a few arguments, plenty of late nights, and the comfortable quiet that settled between people who shared a life. Or at least, that's what I'd thought. Lately, things between us had felt off. Maybe that's why I noticed the way she was dressed today, her hair pulled back just right, a small, carefully concealed smile on her lips. Emily's eyes darted from the window to her phone before meeting mine, and I could sense the shift in her posture. It was subtle, but there. She was about to tell me something important. So, she started, and immediately my stomach clenched. She was smiling, but it wasn't the same smile I'd known. "I'm heading out with the girls this weekend. Just us, like we used to do. You know, a little time to unwind and catch up." Her voice was light, casual, but something was wrong. I felt it, a sense of unease lurking just below the surface. We'd been through these conversations before, girls' weekends, and getaways, but this one felt different. For a moment, I searched her face, looking for a sign that it was all just my imagination. But it wasn't. "Oh," I replied, feigning a casual tone. "Where are you all headed?" Her eyes flickered, and she shrugged, a little too quickly. "Oh, just the lake house. Somewhere quiet, to recharge. No big plans, just a little escape." Her phone buzzed, lighting up on the counter beside her. She glanced at it, a brief, flickering look that vanished as quickly as it appeared, but it was enough for me to notice. When she saw that I was watching, she picked it up, clutched it protectively, and slipped it into her bag. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes. As she walked out the door, throwing a quick, distracted "love you" over her shoulder, I sat there, motionless, my coffee cooling in my hand. The echo of her words hung in the air, and my mind began to race. Why did it feel like she was slipping away from me? Over the years, I'd never doubted her loyalty, her love, or our bond. But now, in the dim light of our kitchen, the doubt crept in. I decided to push it aside, determined to get through the day, but a gnawing curiosity lingered. I knew this feeling, the gut instinct that something was wrong, the sense that everything you'd taken for granted might not be as solid as you believed. So, with a deep breath, I set down my coffee and walked over to her side of the kitchen counter. Her phone was gone, of course, but curiosity drew my eyes to the junk drawer where we kept everything from bills to spare batteries. I don't know what I expected to find, but my hands moved on their own, rummaging through piles of paperwork, odds and ends, until I found her phone bill. The list of numbers didn't mean much to me at first, they were just lines on paper, but as I scanned the page, one number stood out, appearing far more often than the others. I didn't recognize it, and for some reason, the sight of it felt like a punch to the gut. Setting down the bill, I thought through my next steps. Rationally, I knew this could be nothing. Plenty of people have numbers they call repeatedly, friends, family, even colleagues. But this felt different. The number was frequent, logged late at night, around the time she'd usually come home from work, or sometimes even later. My mind raced, scenarios playing out like snapshots, each one darker than the last. The rest of the day passed in a blur, my thoughts a jumble of doubts and uncertainties. I wanted to believe that there was an explanation, a rational reason for this nagging feeling that wouldn't go away. But as the hours ticked by, I knew that I couldn't ignore it. That evening, once the house was silent, I sat down, pulled out my laptop, and did a reverse search on the number. The result was immediate and clear. The number belonged to a man named Josh, a name I didn't recognize. My heart pounded, a mixture of fear and frustration simmering in my chest. Over the next few days, I tried to push the thought out of my mind, hoping that it would fade, that I could go back to the way things were. But the more I tried, the harder it became. Her absence over the weekend didn't feel like just another girls' trip. Instead, it felt like a glaring reminder of how much things had changed between us, how much I'd missed. Each night, as I lay in bed, sleep eluded me, my mind filling with questions I wasn't ready to confront. By Sunday evening, I'd resigned myself to waiting, to holding out for any sign, any explanation that might make sense of this growing distance. When she finally walked through the door, looking tired but far too happy, I felt a surge of anger bubbling beneath the surface. I forced myself to act natural, but inside, I was a tangled mess of emotions, my mind racing with every possible explanation. I asked her about her trip, listened as she spun stories about hikes, laughter, and drinks by the lake, but all I could think about was that number on the phone bill, the strange glances, the phone she clutched so tightly. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I stayed up, scrolling through memories of our years together. Pictures of trips we'd taken, anniversaries we'd celebrated, moments that felt real, solid. But now, those memories felt like scenes from a life I barely recognized. I didn't want to believe that she'd betrayed me, that the woman I'd built my life with was hiding something so hurtful. But I knew that I couldn't ignore it forever. The following week, I was quiet, watchful, looking for any sign, any confirmation of what I dreaded. Emily noticed, of course, but every time she asked if I was okay, I brushed it off, pretending everything was fine. But when she left her phone on the counter that Friday, a chance I'd been waiting for, I picked it up with trembling hands. Scrolling through her messages, my worst fears were confirmed. Josh. Late-night texts, flirtatious messages, plans that went far beyond innocent. My heart sank as I read, each word cutting deeper than the last. When Emily walked back into the room, her eyes widened as she saw her phone in my hands. For a moment, we just stared at each other, her face a mixture of guilt and panic, mine a mask of hurt and disbelief. I stood there, Emily's phone clutched in my hand, while she stared at me, frozen mid-step, her face pale. The silence between us stretched, thick with the unspoken, the devastating truth hanging in the air. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Do you have something to tell me?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm, even to me. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but all I managed was a steady tone that hid the storm raging inside. Emily's eyes met mine, and I could see the flicker of guilt, the instant she realized there was no way out. I knew she was thinking, weighing her options, calculating how to lessen the damage. She tried to take a step forward, but stopped, her voice trembling as she whispered, I'm sorry." That one word, as hollow as it sounded, confirmed everything I'd feared. She wasn't going to deny it, wasn't going to spin some story to explain it all away. I waited, hoping she'd give me something, anything that could explain why the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd trusted with everything, had done this. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. It got out of hand." "Got out of hand?" I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "You've been lying to me for who knows how long, and that's all you have to say." She looked down, a tear sliding down her cheek, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I was too angry, too betrayed to care about her tears. All I could see was the betrayal, the lies woven through the fabric of our marriage, tainting everything we'd built together. "How long?" I demanded, my voice rough. "How long has this been going on?" Her eyes darted away, and she took a shaky breath. "A few months, it was just supposed to be. I don't know, something harmless, a distraction." But then, she trailed off, unable to finish, and I realized that she didn't even have the courage to face what she'd done. A distraction? I could feel my temper rising, the hurt morphing into a deep, burning anger. "Is that what I am to you? A stable, predictable life that you needed to escape from?" She looked at me, her eyes full of remorse. "No, it's not like that. It's just that things between us, they felt different. We felt different, and I didn't know how to fix it. Josh. He just made me feel alive again. Alive? I scoffed, the bitterness seeping into my voice. You've been sneaking around, lying to my face, and you think that's what it means to feel alive? She didn't answer, and in that silence, something inside me shifted. This wasn't the woman I thought I'd married. The Emily I loved was honest, loyal, dependable. But the Emily standing in front of me was a stranger, a person I couldn't even begin to understand. I set her phone down on the table, every muscle in my body tense as I tried to process what this meant for us. Part of me wanted to walk out, to end it right there and be done with the lies, the betrayal. But another part of me clung to the memories, the years we'd spent together, the moments that had once defined us. "What do you want me to say?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I know I've hurt you, and I wish I could take it back. But I can't. I don't know how we got here. I just don't." Her words fell flat, and I wondered if she even understood the magnitude of what she'd done. Did she realize that this wasn't something you could just apologize for and move on from? The foundation of our marriage, the trust that we'd built over years, was shattered, and there was no easy way to rebuild it. "I need some time," I said finally, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Time to think about what this means, where we go from here." She nodded, looking almost relieved, as if she hadn't expected me to keep my composure. "Take all the time you need," she said softly. "I'll be here, whatever you decide." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I grabbed my jacket, slipped on my shoes, and walked out the door, leaving her standing there, her expression unreadable. As I drove aimlessly through the night, the city lights blurring past, I thought back over the past few months. All the little things that I'd brushed off, the late nights, the constant texting, the sudden interest in girls' weekends. It all made sense now, each detail falling into place like the pieces of a twisted puzzle. I pulled over at a park I used to go to when I was younger, back when life was simple, before I knew what it felt like to be blindsided by the person you loved most. I sat there in the quiet, watching the stars through the windshield, and tried to make sense of the mess my life had become. Emily's betrayal felt like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding, and the more I thought about it, the deeper it cut. A part of me wanted to forgive her, to let it go for the sake of the years we'd spent together. But another part of me, the part that felt raw and hurt, knew that it wouldn't be that simple. Forgiveness wouldn't erase the pain, wouldn't undo the lies. I knew I'd never look at her the same way again, never trust her like I once had. I stayed there until the early hours, the weight of it all settling heavy on my shoulders. When I finally went home, the house was dark and silent. Emily was asleep, or pretending to be, and I slipped into the guest room, unable to bear the thought of lying beside her, knowing what I now knew. Over the next few days, I tried to go about my routine, but everything felt hollow, meaningless. I went to work, but my mind was elsewhere, reliving every moment, every argument, every time she'd looked at me with those eyes that I'd once thought held nothing but love. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up, unable to escape the reality of what she'd done. The following weekend, she suggested we talk things over, as if hashing out the details could somehow make it all better. But when we sat down, her explanations only deepened the wound. She tried to justify it, to tell me that she was lost, that she needed something I couldn't give her. Every word felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that the life we'd built, the love I thought we shared, was nothing more than an illusion. When she finally ran out of things to say, I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that the woman sitting across from me was a stranger. The Emily I loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone who had willingly torn our marriage apart for a fleeting thrill, a temporary escape. "I think we're done here," I said, my voice steady but cold. She didn't protest, didn't try to argue. She just nodded, a look of resignation in her eyes, as if she'd already accepted that this was the end. That night, as I lay in the guest room, I felt an odd sense of relief. The decision had been made, the path forward clear, even if it meant walking away from everything I'd once held dear. In the days that followed our final conversation, I felt as if I were floating above my life, watching it crumble in slow motion. Emily went through the motions of pretending things were normal, but we both knew the truth: whatever love or loyalty we'd shared had died the moment she chose someone else. And no amount of apologies or quiet dinners could revive it. With a strange sense of purpose, I began making arrangements. I packed a bag and found an apartment nearby, something small and temporary, a place where I could think, away from the house that had become a shell of all I'd believed in. I told her I'd be moving out for a while, to clear my head, but the truth was that I needed to escape the reminders of what we'd lost. Each room in that house was haunted by memories, of laughter, shared dreams, quiet Sunday mornings, and I couldn't bear to be surrounded by them anymore. Emily didn't say much when I told her. She sat quietly, her face pale, nodding as if she'd known this was coming all along. Maybe she had, maybe she'd prepared for it in some way I couldn't understand. I noticed her bags, still half-packed from her last weekend away, by the bedroom door, as if she, too, was always ready to leave at a moment's notice. That realization cut deep, and as I walked out the door, a part of me felt strangely liberated, as if a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally lifted. The first few nights in the new apartment were difficult. The silence was overwhelming, each empty room echoing the loneliness I'd kept buried for weeks. I tried to keep myself busy, poring over work projects, going for long walks, anything to drown out the thoughts that crept in when I was alone. But no matter how hard I tried, Emily's betrayal replayed in my mind, her face, the messages on her phone, the quiet admissions she'd made when I confronted her. It was as if her choices had been carved into my memory, a scar I'd carry forever. One night, as I sat alone in the dimly lit apartment, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting a work email or perhaps a message from a well-meaning friend checking in on me. But instead, it was Emily. She'd sent a long, rambling message, filled with apologies and pleas to talk things over, to find a way to move forward. I stared at the words, feeling a strange mix of anger and sadness. How could she still believe there was anything left to salvage? Without replying, I set the phone down and went to bed, determined to put it all behind me. But as the days passed, the messages kept coming. She would call late at night, leaving voicemails filled with tearful apologies, asking me to come back, to give her another chance. I knew she was grasping, desperate to hold on to something that was already gone, but I felt no urge to respond. The man I'd been before all this, the man who would have forgiven, tried to understand, was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who had learned the painful lesson of betrayal. Then, a week after I'd moved out, I got a call from an unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something told me to answer. On the other end was a woman who introduced herself as Megan, Josh's wife. My breath caught in my throat, and I gripped the phone tighter, listening as she explained that she'd found out about Emily and Josh's affair, that she'd known for a few months and had finally reached a breaking point. Her voice was calm, almost eerily so, and I could tell she'd been holding in her emotions for far too long. "I thought you should know," she said, her tone flat. "I thought you deserved to hear it from someone who understands." We talked for nearly an hour, each of us sharing details of our spouse's betrayal, filling in the blanks that the other had been left with. Megan told me about the long nights she'd spent waiting for Josh to come home, the excuses, the lies. I told her about the weekend trips, the late-night texts, the way Emily's demeanor had changed. It was surreal, hearing a stranger confirm what I'd been piecing together, and by the end of the conversation, I felt a strange sense of solidarity with her. "I'm done with him," she said, her voice firm. "I just wanted you to know. I hope you find peace after all this." Her words lingered long after I hung up. Peace. It seemed like an impossible goal, something distant and intangible. But knowing that Emily's affair was finally out in the open, that the life she'd been leading was laid bare for others to see, gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. There was no going back now. Whatever future she'd envisioned with Josh was over, and she would have to live with the consequences of her choices. The next day, as I packed up the last of my things from our house, I thought about Megan's words. I realized that I didn't just want to leave, I wanted closure. I wanted Emily to understand the full weight of what she'd done, to see that her actions had consequences beyond the confines of our marriage. So, before I left, I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared countless meals, and wrote her a letter. I poured everything into that letter, the hurt, the anger, the sense of betrayal that had haunted me since the moment I discovered her affair. I told her about the emptiness I felt, the memories of our life together that now seemed tainted, hollow. I didn't hold back, sparing her none of the pain she'd caused, the pain I'd had to carry alone. And when I was finished, I left it on the table, the final piece of myself that I was willing to give her. As I walked out of the house for the last time, I felt a strange sense of freedom. It was over. The life I'd known, the woman I'd loved, were memories now, parts of a story that had ended in betrayal. But as I stood there, breathing in the crisp morning air, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was something new waiting for me on the other side of this pain. The months that followed felt like wading through a fog. Every day seemed to blur into the next as I tried to rebuild my life, piece by piece. The apartment was still mostly bare, but I had a few things scattered around, a coffee table, a couch, some books I couldn't bring myself to read. It was all just quiet. The sort of quiet that wraps around you in the dead of night, in those moments when you feel the full weight of your loneliness. Emily had stopped trying to contact me, finally accepting that whatever we'd had was gone. I'd found some relief in that silence, in knowing she was out of my life for good. But every so often, I'd catch myself wondering what she was doing, if she'd moved on, if she was happy. I tried not to care, tried to bury those questions, but they had a way of creeping in when I least expected it. One late afternoon, I decided to drive out to the coast, something I hadn't done in years. Emily and I had spent some of our best moments there, walking along the shore, laughing at the wind as it whipped her hair around her face. The memory stung, but I needed to confront it, to face the ghosts of our life together that still lingered in my mind. The beach was quiet, nearly empty. I walked along the shoreline, feeling the cold sand under my feet, watching the waves crash and recede. The sun was low on the horizon, casting a pale, golden glow over the water. For a moment, I felt something close to peace. Maybe this was what I needed, just a little time to let it all wash away. But then I heard someone call my name. I turned, and my heart dropped. It was Emily. She was standing a few yards away, looking different, thinner, her face drawn and tired. For a moment, we just stared at each other, as if neither of us could believe this was happening. Part of me wanted to walk away, to keep going and leave her there on that beach, but something held me back. "Hi," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. I nodded, unsure what to say, every word caught in my throat. She took a step closer, wrapping her arms around herself as if to shield against the cold. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she said finally, her voice trembling. I thought you'd moved on." "I tried," I replied, my voice harsher than I intended. "But you don't just move on from something like that, Emily." She looked away, nodding as if she understood. "I know. I never wanted to hurt you. I know it's too late to say that, but I need you to know." I could feel the anger rising in me, the memories of all the nights I'd spent wondering why, the hours of trying to piece together what I'd done wrong, what I'd missed. But looking at her now, all I could feel was a hollow sadness. "Why did you do it?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. She sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of it. "I don't know. I thought I was missing something, that I needed more. But I was wrong. I was selfish. And now I've lost everything." Her words lingered, sinking in slowly. There was a strange sincerity in her eyes, a rawness I hadn't seen before. For the first time, I wondered if maybe she was just as broken as I was. We stood there in silence, watching the waves as they rose and fell, each of us lost in our own thoughts. After a while, she turned to me, her face a mixture of sadness and something else, something like resolve. "I need you to know. I never stopped loving you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I wanted to feel something in response to her words, anger, relief, even forgiveness, but all I felt was emptiness. It was too late. The love we'd shared was gone, and no amount of apologies could bring it back. I nodded, acknowledging her words, but they felt like echoes, reaching me from a place that no longer existed. We stood there until the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the beach in shadows. Finally, she took a shaky breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Goodbye, James," she said, her voice breaking as she turned and walked away. I watched her go, feeling a strange sense of finality. She was gone, and with her went the last remnants of the life we'd shared. I turned back to the ocean, letting the sound of the waves drown out everything else, hoping it would wash away the ache in my chest. Days passed, then weeks, and I found myself settling into a new routine, slowly, carefully rebuilding my life. I started seeing a therapist, a quiet older man who listened without judgment as I poured out the hurt I'd been carrying. It helped, in a way I hadn't expected. Little by little, the anger faded, replaced by something softer, a quiet acceptance of what I'd lost and what I could still gain. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. "Hello." I answered, my voice tentative. "Is this James?" a woman's voice asked, hesitant and gentle. "Yes," I replied, frowning. "Who is this?" There was a pause, and then the woman spoke. "I'm so sorry to call you like this. My name is Carla. I'm a nurse at St. Anne's Hospital." My heart pounded, a cold dread settling over me. What's going on?" She hesitated. "I don't know how else to say this, but Emily was brought in earlier tonight. There was an accident. She's not doing well. She wanted me to call you." The room spun, and I gripped the edge of the table, struggling to process her words. "Emily. An accident." My mind raced, images of her flashing through my mind, her smile, the way she used to laugh, the way she looked the last time I saw her on that beach. Can I see her?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, but, you should come soon," the nurse replied, her voice filled with sympathy. "She's asking for you." I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my keys, barely aware of the drive to the hospital, my mind a blur of memories and regrets. When I arrived, a nurse led me down a quiet corridor, her face somber, and stopped outside a room. She gave me a sympathetic nod, then opened the door. Emily was lying in the hospital bed, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, the beeping sounds eerily calm against the backdrop of my panic. Her eyes flickered open as I approached, and a faint smile touched her lips. "James," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with something I hadn't heard before, "peace." I took her hand, feeling the coldness of her skin, the fragility of her grip. "Emily. I'm here." She nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I'm glad. I needed to see you, to say. I'm sorry. For everything." Tears blurred my vision as I held her hand tighter, unable to find the words. "You don't have to apologize. Just rest, okay?" But she shook her head, her gaze intense. "No, I need to say this. I need you to know. I never stopped loving you, James. Even when I was lost, even when I made those mistakes, you were always there in my heart." Her words cut deep, the sincerity in her eyes breaking through the walls I built around my heart. I nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek, feeling the weight of everything we'd lost. "I forgive you," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I forgive you, Emily." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at me, as if she'd finally found the peace she'd been searching for. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Her eyes drifted shut, her breathing growing slower, softer, until finally, it stopped. I sat there, holding her hand, as the weight of her absence settled over me, a silence deeper than any I'd known. The love we'd shared, the life we'd built, was gone, but as I sat there, I realized that somehow, in those final moments, we'd found a way to let go. And even in the emptiness, there was a sliver of peace.